I believe that's true in every medical field, in the educational world, that unless the center is the person that you're supporting and the person that you're trying to assist, then you're always going to be missing the point. So for me, improve training, improve theory, but it'll still never get where it needs to get unless the person with lived experience is at the center, right?
Well, welcome to Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland Labrador's first podcast about stuttering. My name is Greg O'Grady, and I am a person who stutters and a co host of Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland Labrador's first podcast about stuttering, along with my co hosts.
And I'm Katelyn Mayo. I'm a speech language pathology student, and I'm Greg's co host on this podcast.
Some Stutter Law mission is dismantling and rebuilding stuttering. Let's start listening. Some Stutter Law mandate is in the spirit of Newfoundland Labrador's humor, robust and frank interactive discussions. Some Stutter Law podcast aims to rebuild confidence and hope for today's and tomorrow's person who happens to stutter by dismantling stuttering myths, stigma, stereotypes, and barriers.
The objectives of Some Stutter Law podcast are supporting, raising awareness, and increasing understanding and acceptance of stuttering, providing people who stutter, their families, professionals, students, and the general public with current information, research, and resources about stuttering, and promoting advocacy and support for people who stutter.
Today's Some Stutter Law welcomes Brad Glynn. Brad is the executive director of Consumers Health Awareness Network, Newfoundland Labrador, channel for short. And Brad, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Brad, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. First, Greg and Katelyn, thanks for having me on today. For just a little bit of myself personally, I grew up in Victoria, went to school in Carbonear. I was an educator for about the first 12 years of my professional career. And I was really lucky. I taught everything from kindergarten to grade 12 in that time. And in the past 6 months or so, I moved on and I've become the executive director of Channel, which has been amazingly rewarding. I live in the city with my family. I've got two small boys who are 6 and 4, and that occupies most of my time kind of outside of that. And the other piece, and I know we're going to talk about Channel in a bit, is that Channel's mission is related to mental health and addictions and people with lived experience. So I have lived experience of mental health issues, largely related to some concussions I've suffered in my life, and then I live with pretty consistent generalized anxiety, and some more periodic major depressive episodes that kind of sneak up on me like a cliff. So that's a little bit about who I am in a nutshell, and I know we'll delve deeper into that sort of stuff, but that's a good for an intro.
So, Brad, so you're stuttering is what I believe the clinical term is a neurogenic stutter, which means that it was caused by an injury. Do you want to share a little bit about what happened?
Absolutely. So I suffered a few concussions when I was a younger guy. And then in 2011 or 2012, I suffered one on a basketball court that didn't seem that bad, honestly. It shook me up a little bit, but nothing too much. But unfortunately, for 5 or 6 months afterwards, I suffered some pretty severe post-concussion symptoms. And honestly, it's a decade later, and I still live with some of the impacts. And just the cumulative effect of it. And of course, as an educator, public speaking is and was my life, and I've been lucky that I've had lots of opportunities through volunteer work to do public speaking. And what happened was, I probably always lived with anxiety and depression and just, wasn't honest about it. Like, unfortunately, a lot of us are. But it really became more severe about a decade ago. And, a manifestation of all that was all of a sudden I would stutter in situations, and I would get caught on words, and I just wouldn't be able to get over it. The That's funny. The word that bothers me the most is the when I'm speaking, and I'll get caught on the, and it's just on repeat, of course, and I really can't get through it. And the frustrating part of that when I first started experiencing it was it affects your confidence, right? And I'd go to get up, and I read at church speaking in front of students, and I wouldn't know when it was coming, and I wasn't at a spot where I was anywhere near accepting it. And I'd go weeks where it wouldn't kind of happen, and I'd feel like, okay, I'm done with that now. But of course, when my anxiety would tick up and get more severe, up there it is again, kind of getting me there. And it's, as I've thought about coming on this show today, I have no struggle talking about, my anxiety or my depression. I have no trouble admitting that, I've lived with suicidal thoughts and had some really dark days. But openly owning the fact that I stutter at times. It was really interesting to go through that thought process of kind of owning that, because I definitely struggled with it. And I think, that's that self stigma, right? That I don't want to admit that it's there, and I want to admit that I can control it, and I, feel like I'm somehow wrong for having it happen, and all those things that self stigma does to ourselves, right? Which is so destructive. So yeah, I was 27, 28 years old when it started, and I will, if I can get really prepared for a speaking engagement, I can do a pretty good job. But it's often casual conversation. I left a kindergarten classroom to take this job, and it'd be nothing to be in the middle of a picture book with kids. And if too many p words presented themselves in a row, if the word the happened at the start of a sentence, and all of a sudden, I just had to stop reading, and just kind of regroup and take those breaths, and do the things that I would need to do to kind of get back on it. So that's kind of the journey with it. And for me, it's definitely one that, living with mental illness and living with those things, acceptance of certain pieces are hard. And it's definitely been one I've struggled to accept, and accept that it's just part of me, not good nor bad. And it's just kind of part of who I am now, and I need to do the work to ensure I'm accepting of myself, and I'm understanding of myself, which is often so hard.
But Brad, when you started to stutter, like like it must have had a severe severe impact on your mental health, and you were saying that you have a history of depression, anxiety. Brad, what advice would you give other people that stutter?
I think, I go back to that word acceptance, and it's so easy to say it. um, but I think finding tangible ways, something I've done for myself, and that lived experience lens, Greg, as you know from our chats, is so important for me. Is oftentimes I don't see my anxiety coming, um, but I might notice that the stuttering is coming on and being more severe, and what I've done is I've kind of reframed it in that it's almost like a guidepost. It's like a sign saying, you know, Brad, here's some of your symptoms presenting themselves, right? And one of the struggles with mental illness is people go, it's in your head, and our response is, exactly, it's in my head. I'm glad you understand. But it's valuable in that there are cues for ourselves. The traditional ones might be, my sleep hygiene becoming awful, or I'm short with someone, or I just want to kind of go in on myself. But for me, the stuttering becomes more severe as my generalized anxiety is impacting my life more. So I kind of use it as a tool now. And I'm a real kind of action focused person, and I'm kind of really driven in that way. So to reframe it in a way so that there's a value to it, because it reminds me to check my mental wellness. It reminds me to have an eye. It gives me pause to think. So that's one thing that I've done, and that may sound odd, but that's the kind of way I work with it. And then the other is remembering that um, it's just a piece of me, right? It is not everything. I really try to use the words that I want to use, with the exception of I really personally try hard. If I get stuck on a word, but I know I really like good words. I like a big word that does a job. If I get stuck on it, I really try to put the work into getting it out. I really try to anticipate it. And for me, the other piece is remembering that that people are good and people want to understand. And oftentimes we anticipate that we're burdening people in some way with whatever our lived experience is. But even those people who stigmatize accidentally or because of societal conditioning, they're good people. um, and that for me is really important, because I believe people are good, and I believe people want to make life as accessible as possible for people with any type of lived experience. And I'm not good at that, to be really open. But for me, it goes back to that first word I said here, right? Is the acceptance, and finding ways to reframe it. And it took me, it's probably only the past 2 or 3 years where I've been able to reframe it in a positive light, and doing the hard work that is, and speaking to people about it and being honest about it. I've got a great psychologist, and we talk about lots of stuff, but she's helped me with this. So finding the supports out there that you need. My wife is able to listen and be understanding. And when I get frustrated and just want to scream, um she'll just listen and understand that's the place I come. So those support systems are important as well.
So you have kind of a unique perspective, I guess, because your stutter came on later in life. One of the things I've thought about that I find very interesting is how to separate, I guess, from somebody who stuttered since they were a child, separating the anxiety or the depression from the stutter itself, like, because it goes beyond the stutter, but it's hard to see that. So I'm wondering kind of, I guess, what changes you might have noticed in your self-image and your mental health and things like that when the stutter started.
um Really candidly, it was really hard. I love public speaking, and it's funny. I was a really outgoing kid, and then that got lost somewhere in my middle school and high school years. And when I decided I wanted to be an educator in 2005, I was attending a church at the time, and I had to start reading at church just so I could public speak. um, because it's like, how you going to be a teacher if you can't public speak? And I can remember the first time I read at the church, I literally memorized what I had to read for fear that I would get so nervous that, and you want to talk about my anxiety manifesting itself before I was ready to acknowledge that it was there. Like, I mean, I memorized, like, it was like a 7-minute passage, and I got up there. I don't think I looked at the book once. So, but once I got past that in 2005, and this is before the last concussion, I really value the impact of public speaking. On personal occasions, whether it be at a wedding, whether it be trying to convince a friend of something, I value doing a good job on it. I like to be very prepared when I public speak. I'm one of those people who kind of puts down to the minute how long we're going to spend on certain things. Um, so to get to a place where I wasn't always confident I was going to be on my A game, so to say. It just it sucked. There's no other way to do it, to say it. I mean, sorry. And it just, you're right, because there's struggles for those who live with it from birth, and there's difficulties for those people who kind of develop it later in life. And the only way to face it for me was to say, okay, this is it. This is part of me. And for me, I to go back to that public speaking piece, working with kids are so accepting, right? 5-year-olds are accepting, and 15-year-olds are accepting, in their own little way. So, I was lucky in that I really had a boot camp, right? I was I was spending 6 hours a day, 185 days a year in a classroom, and therefore I had no choice. Right? I can dodge it for 20 or 30 minutes if I'm speaking somewhere. I can, building cues to kind of make sure I'm manifesting it, building in the breath pauses, selective word choice and certain things. But if you're 6 hours in a room in front of people, it's going to come out, right? And I get excited. You can probably tell I got a lot of energy. And when I'd be teaching and there'd be a group of kids, like, I'd get excited, and with that would come it. But kind of like even right now, where I'm just, doubling, tripling up on words here as I'm kind of telling my story, just coming to accept that that's just part of what they're going to live with. And particularly with little kids, I just talk to them about it, right? Mr. Glynn just needs to stop the book right now and just take a moment. And what a great way to teach kids to be accepting of the parts of themselves that they want. So I found that really, really empowering, and it was probably helping my self-image even before I realized it was helping my self-image. Right? I was still just hating it and letting it really, really frustrate me, but I was still, just through my life, making it a part of my life. Even if I wasn't at a place where I was even recognizing that. So it was hard for my self-image, and it certainly, my mental wellness definitely did and does suffer at times. If I'm, I was on a call with, one of those important people that you talk to about a month and a half ago, and I got stuck on and it was one of these Zoom calls with, 2 or 3 of my colleagues, 2 or 3 people from the organization I was dealing with, and like, it just stank, right? There's no other way to put it. It was really, really frustrating. Um, so pushing through it, getting through it, I acknowledged it in that space. I named it because, it's kind of the red herring sitting there. But then afterwards, allowing myself to feel the feelings, allowing myself to process it. The words you used at the start, dismantling and rebuilding, to bring that into that moment, just breaking that moment down, for what it was. And that word hope, hope is at the center of recovery for mental illness and for, substance use issues. And nothing went wrong in that meeting. We formed a partnership with the group of people we were talking to. And again, that goes back to the goodness of people, remembering that I probably catastrophized it more than anyone else in that space. And that's a hard one to remind ourselves of, right? But that comes with humility, right? People spend a lot less time thinking about us than we than we often give credit to. So, I've thought about that moment 10 times since it happened, and let's be honest, no one else has probably thought about it for 2 seconds. And that helps me in the rougher moments. That helps me. It's like, you know what, Brad, you're not quite that important. People aren't leaving thinking about all these moments that you had with them.
Brad, as 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 people who stutter, we have trouble. Many of us, reaching out to to others for support, and like let alone just just to just to acknowledge all all of the all of the emotional psychological issues related to stuttering. What what advice would you give people who stutter to to go about like seeking out the appropriate supports, because a lot of people who stutter do not feel safe because we're so isolated within ourselves, and I feel that people who stutter have some trust issues as well. So what would you suggest would be an initial journey just to seek out and just to acknowledge like what's going on within us, like like I'm talking about the the below the surface of the iceberg here.
That the word I was going to use was trust, right? When you want to restart rebuilding, you got to start with people you trust, right? And I have three thoughts on that, right? First of all, people in your circle, right? Who in your circle do you really think you can trust with something? Is it a family member? Is it a best friend? Is it a coworker? But someone, when you're ready to take that step. I can remember when I first called a psychologist to start talking about stuff. I was given a phone number by a trusted kind of, I'll say, friend. Um, and to make that phone call was right. They talk about this with particularly with substance use, right? When someone says they're ready to take a step, like you got to make that step happen quickly, because the window for them keeping the courage up to do it is short, right? And I called this person, and they told me they weren't taking clients. And I'd spent like a month building up the courage to call it. And then she was like, I'm full. And she was like, but I got another person. Um, and I was like, oh my God, I gotta make another phone call. And like phone calls are a thing for me, as many people with anxiety. No, right? The phone calls are like the worst thing ever. Um, and I hung up the phone and I was in a room with my best friend, and she was like, you got to make the call, like right now. I was like, I just spent a month building up to this one phone call, and you're telling me I got to make a second phone call in 30 seconds? And she was like, if you don't make the call right now, you're never going to make the call. And she was right. And I did it. And I'm really lucky that I have a fantastic psychologist, and I've been with her for 7 years, and only because I had the courage. So, finding that person in your corner and thinking, what's the concrete step I want to take? Right? Do I want to reach out to someone with lived experience? Right? Because there's huge value in that person with lived experience, right, Greg? Because as soon as you and I first chatted, when you and I, we're on a Zoom call, I felt so much more comfortable in acknowledging where I was with my own stuttering, because that lived experience piece is safe and trusted. And we may not have the exact experiences, and we may not feel the same way about it, but the empathy is obvious, because the empathy that comes with lived experience is so concrete and so tangible. Um, and then saying, if I feel I need the support of medical professionals, um, research is always good, finding someone you can trust. And I always say, there's lots wrong with the healthcare system. And we all know that. But to me, that's a system problem. And the majority of the people working in the system want to help people and want to support people. And that doesn't mean they don't have stigmatizing views, and that doesn't mean they won't use stigmatizing language, and that doesn't mean they won't commit stigmatizing actions. But through my experience, 90% of those people, when they get pointed out that they're doing something stigmatizing, want to fix it and want to understand. So I can often, often criticisms of the healthcare system, because there's lots of room for growth, particularly in mental health and addictions. But remembering the people in the system are good people. They just were grown up and taught in a system that's got some gaps, as I guess the polite way I'd put it. So when you're talking about those people taking first steps, that word you use, trust, um, is just everything. And thinking about the fact that this is a sustained plan, right? This isn't a short-term thing. What you're doing is you're setting yourself up for long-term success. And by success, I mean more acceptance of yourself, more skills to deal with what you're dealing with, more confidence in your ability to advocate for yourself. And that can all be done through those close people in your life, through attaching with lived experience, and through trusting that with some pushes, the healthcare system will be there for you, even with the horror stories that we all know, even with the struggles. That I truly believe the people in the healthcare system are good people and want to help, and sometimes they just don't know how, and they don't know the mistakes we're making, and that's where that lived experience piece comes in, because we have a role to point out to them their gaps in understanding.
So one thing we've talked about a lot on the podcast is kind of both SLPs having awareness of counseling skills, but also counselors and psychologists having awareness of communication disorders and stuttering. And I know that that's not really a big thing right now, is there's not a lot of counselors and psychologists out there who really understand the emotional side of communication disorders and stuttering and things like that. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that would be. Like, would it be a benefit, do you think, to have counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists and doctors and stuff who understand, who have some sort of background in communication disorders and stuttering and things like that?
Absolutely, and you're kind of into my wheelhouse now with our work here at Channel, right? And I think there's two ways to do that, right? You know, I think education is the answer, right? Because I lived in education, so right, all my solutions to the world's problems are through education. But the best time to train someone is today, and the next best time is in the moment. But the even better time is before they're out in the field, right? If we've got a social worker who might have some stigmatizing attitudes, it takes a lot of work to rebuild that, right? Because they've worked in a system that is reinforced it. The best time to get them is before they're in the field. And I think that's the first start, is improving programming before someone has their counseling credentials, or has finished their psychology work or their psychiatry work, or any work where they're confronting people with lived experience, particularly lived experience where there's a lot of misunderstanding about causes. There's a lot of assumptions made. A lot of the work is superficial, and by superficial I mean it's on the surface level. And breaking those things down before they get out there, I think, is critical. And then I think, in mental health and addictions, the research supports the fact that contact-based learning is the best way to retrain people's minds and to decrease stigma and to improve understanding, which therefore improves practice. And I think that holds true of any area, so it would be true of people with communication disorders, that exposing speech language pathologists, exposing counselors, exposing psychologists, exposing anyone to people with lived experience through authentic contact-based learning that is sustained, because one-offs don't work. So let's, and I don't know this, but let's pretend that the speech language pathologists have a conference every year. Finding a way to center lived experience within that conference, right? Not a token person here or there, but understanding and having the humility as professionals with huge amounts of training, which is really valuable. But centering the voice of lived experience and making it about the person. And I'm sure you both know that would be a gigantic culture shift for almost any healthcare profession. I will say that the work, in our field, the work that the Mental Health Commission of Canada has done with the recovery model for mental health and mental illness has done a great job of improving centering people with lived experience. And then there's lots of room for growth there, and there's lots of hurdles, and all those systemic barriers I was speaking about a minute ago are slowly getting broken down. And I would think for people with communication disorders, that's the same work that needs to be done, is first of all, the formal education, and then secondary, as people are in their zone of practice, centering the people they're working with. So often, they're the last thing spoken about, right? A new idea might be spoken about, a new method was spoken about, but if it's not starting, if the fancy charts and graphs and visuals people do up doesn't have the person with lived experience in the middle, then what are you doing? Right? To me, you're immediately playing a losing game, and I believe that's true in every medical field, in the educational world, that unless the center is the person that you're supporting and the person that you're trying to assist, then you're always going to be missing the point. So for me, improve training, improve theory, but it'll still never get where it needs to get unless the person with lived experience is at the center, right? I say here, we can't help 50,000 peers. We can help one peer at a time 50,000 times, right? And taking it down to that level makes it real, and it brings affective stories into it, which increases our engagement, which increases our ability to learn, which increases our desire to learn, which to me is the best way to create system change and to do some change management, because change is hard and we don't like change. So you're into the stuff I'm really passionate about here, Katelyn. But to me, it is, in 2 or 3 words, it's center lived experience, and everything else would follow.
Yeah. Brad, with, we know that, there is, little understanding and and attention paid to stuttering, within our province. Now, I'm talking about, there's, you know, little understanding and and awareness paid to the physical component of stuttering, whereas the whole mental health issue is is another factor to be addressed. And and I know that what we're doing on some stutter law podcasts, what we are doing with the Newfoundland and Labrador Stuttering Association, what we are doing with the NLSA Solidarity Project. We're we have laid the foundation of awareness for both the actual physical component as well as the mental health component. Whereas we really need, we really need to partner with with a place like Channel to to be able to offer an outreach program to people who stutter as well as our family,
Mm.
to address not 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 only the actual physical aspect of stuttering, but the mental health component. And so I feel that what we're doing with the channel at the moment is we we have started to develop a partnership to offer the necessary mental health support. Do you want to share your thoughts about that, Brad? And Brad, do you want to talk about the the funding proposal we have submitted?
Absolutely. And I look at Channel, and I look at the CMHA and L. We have very broad mandates, right? Channel's vision is that individuals living with mental health and addiction issues realize their full potential, free from stigma and isolation. And a pretty large portion of society lives with mental health or addiction issues, right? Maybe not a defined mental illness, maybe not something that needs continuous support, but we're hitting a lot of the 550,000 people in this province, right? And the CMHA is the same. And if you look at Paul Fifield, who's the acting CEO over there, and their team, they do a great job with their broad mandate, and I think the channel does a great job with ours, in that more targeted groups, which are so valuable because you can really advocate on specific issues like the NLSA and the work you're doing here. You're almost like the tip of a tip of an arrow, in that you can really hit specifically what you're doing. And Channel's work is Brad. Our frontline services are peer support based, and that frontline work is essential. And we've got a role to play in decreasing stigma, and that's stigma anywhere. Stigma in any form is as a harm to stigma in all forms, right? And so I followed your work, largely because of personal reasons, of course. And so a proposal is a grant opportunity was put out by Health Canada, and it was for intersectoral action, right? And social determinants of health, increased capacity for education, whether that be to the general public or within healthcare sectors, educational sectors. And I just saw an opportunity. I often try to think, who is, if I choose, I can hide the fact that I live with depression. And that's pretty unhealthy for me to do. Now, not wearing the appropriate masks and certain things at times, but I can hide that, right? So I spend a fair bit of time thinking, who can't hide the thing that causes their stigmatization, because those groups are particularly vulnerable. And that's true of anything, whether we're in the mental health world or whether we're in the world of racialized communities, whether we're in the world of gender-based discrimination. Some people can hide that which causes stigma. And it's important to remember, I think, and this is my opinion on this, that there's a privilege in that, right? There's a privilege in being able to hide that thing which causes stigma. And someone who stutters often doesn't have that luxury. So that stigma is often felt on a daily basis, is often just a lived reality of, going to a store, meeting with friends, trying to get that thought out. And I think you do great work, and I love how on the ground the NLSA is. I love the work of Some Stutter Law, because like you talked about, in the spirit of Newfoundland and Labrador, right? Um, we solve problems by discussing them. So the fact that you started with discussions with this podcast, to me, is right on point. I've taken a lot of inspiration from it and spurred lots of little thoughts in my head as a tangent of things we could do here. But it made me want to reach out and work with you and try to find a way to do it. And we're a pretty large organization. We got 33 employees. We got employees from here up to Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and everywhere in between. So we're lucky in that we bring some of that organizational capacity that would be of value. And the proposal we put forward was for work largely in public education and largely in contact-based learning, so that we could combine the great understanding that the NLSA has of all the issues related to communication disorders and stuttering, and our understanding and capacity to already have partnerships with organizations in public education, already having some ins with some certain groups, having employees that we could dedicate to the task. And silos hurt, right? And the not-for-profit sector is not unique. And there's lots of silos places, and Channel's not unique from that. We all like our little plot of land, and we all like to tend it. But getting out of the silos, how system change occurs, and it's how you increase the possibility of good change management. Because the issues may seem individual, but if we're focused on the individual issue, we're missing a bigger picture. And I think the partnership that we're hoping to form, and hopefully we're successful with the grant, but if we're not, I keep banging on doors until I find the avenue where we can get it. Is that it would give a year's work, which would hopefully build on itself, of people whose sustained job is to think about the problem, solution the problem, and then action solutions. And I really believe in incrementalism. It's not the most popular kind of political theory in the world right now, but it's easier to climb a ladder with 10 rungs than it is to climb a ladder with 2 rungs, separated much further apart. And partnerships allow that to take place. And that's why it's so exciting to me that we would do that. And again, I'm a drum on the lived experience. I've even said this to you, Greg, right? There's a justice in your lived experience being compensated for its time. Um, there's a justice in my lived experience of mental illness being compensated for my time. And I will say places do a lot better job of that now. So volunteers are amazing, and oftentimes they're the grassroots people who get things off the ground. But there is a justice to honoring our lived experience as an expertise, right? A speech language pathologist is an expert, and they would anticipate being compensated for that expertise. A psychologist is an expert, and they would anticipate being compensated for that expertise. You know what? I've sat down some days and wondered how I'm going to get to the next day. Um, and that has given me an expertise that my psychologist who's read books on suicide, who's read books on those things, is never going to have. Right. So the people who help you and support you as you journey with your stutter, Greg, have an expertise, but you have an expertise from living it every single day. And that's what excited me about partnering with your group, is it allowed us to find another group of people with lived experience with that expertise. And that just gets me very excited and very passionate, because I go back to that system change, right? I want to change systems. I want to work with people who change systems, and centering that person. I go back to what I was saying about those things, right? Centering the person is how you do it. So championing lived experience and championing people who are the tip of that arrow on lived experience, because it takes courage, right? It'd be easy to be the 10th person who started doing work on, stuttering advocacy in this province, and there's people who do it throughout history, but being so open and so out there takes a lot of courage, because putting yourself out there is hard, and sharing your story can be hard. So for me, the partnership really came from, first of all, that personal place, which is where often many of us start, but de-siloing and knowing that system change occurs when you get time and effort to put into it, and honoring those voices of lived experience is just so important.
Brad, I mean, you know, you've hit the nail on the head in mm, many ways. We hope that in this partnership, that people who stutter will will have a place to call, let's say, to find support, because I mean this you know this you know this you know this this is another missing piece of the puzzle, because you see, for people who who stutter, as well as their families, that are in crisis, let's say, there's nobody to call, like, that that have that that has an outreach, to people who stutter. And I'm hoping that we 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 will be able to to work with challenge staff to actually set up an outreach program. You
Absolutely,
want to.
absolutely, and then that's the goal, right? If we had a partnership with you, we honor everyone's lived experience, and when we're an organization, all 33 have people in this organization have lived experience of mental health issues or substance use issues. You can't get hired here without it. So to go to the grant, not to get in the weeds with it, but we requested, I think, a position or a position and a half. And on my end, if we're working with people with communication disorders, then the lived experience we're going to want for that position is someone with that lived experience, right? Because we had our public education supervisor, Monica Fletcher, was on a roundtable with the lieutenant governor a few months back, and the lieutenant governor told a story about speaking to a gentleman who was in the military. And he said to her, my psychologist is great, my psychiatrist is great, my GP is great, but he said when I wake up at 3 a.m. with dreams caused by PTSD, he said I want someone who's been in the foxhole, right? He wanted someone who gets it, right? So it's not dismissing other healthcare professionals, because it's all part of a team and it's all part of a circle of care. But there are some times you just want someone who gets it, because it's a different perspective. I might go see my psychologist next week, but there are times I choose to chat with a fellow manager here who gets it, and they're different conversations. So, I hear what you're saying, that nobody to call peace, like that. How hard is that, right? It's just a hard thought to think that someone's sitting there and just wants to know someone is out there who gets it, and to feel like you can't access that is just, I mean, that's just brutal. And it's effective to me right now because I've been there in my own way, right? Guys, unfortunately, guys, we're not that great at talking about, what's going on, right? So I work in this organization. I still, if I was out for a beer with buddies, certainly probably wouldn't be the first conversation I'd have. But the CBC had an article yesterday about a paper that came out last month, and the suicide rate in Newfoundland and Labrador has gone up 3 times in the past 40 years, right? And 83% of those are men. And I'd still often hesitate with my lived experience to bring it up. So to go back to someone with a communication disorder or a stutter, the value of a partnership and of hiring that person with lived experience is to go back to the Lieutenant Governor's analogy, right? Sometimes you just want someone who gets it, right? And that's where that, and I don't want to say professionalization of it because I don't think that's the right word because it loses some of its grassrootsness. But um, when it's volunteers, we've all got other responsibilities, right? I volunteer with organizations, and you do it off the side of your desk with the time that you have. But those people out there with nobody to call, it's important that they have someone who isn't doing it off the side of their desk. It's important that it is there, right? And I would argue that, if I'm sure between the three of us, we could make a pretty good list of different types of lived experiences. In an ideal world, every single person in Newfoundland and Labrador would have access to someone whose job is to assist them who has that same lived experience. And there's so much intersection between lived experience that, yeah, people could probably do 5 or 6 different things, but it's invaluable and it is uplifting. It creates hope. It is often more solution based. It is often more about self-responsibility. It is often more about teaching people how to advocate for themselves. And to me, the funds are what's important there. And I always say, if you want to know what people value in society, look where they're putting their money, right? So as you gain traction, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's a different type of healthcare issue, you don't need to ask a politician or someone in the healthcare system whether they value solving this problem. Go find their budget line and see where that budget line compares to other budget lines, and you'll see how much how much effort they're putting into solving the problem. And that maybe that's a little pessimistic of me, but my experience would hold that out to be to be true. So that's where that lived experience piece comes in, is that those casual conversations you have with someone are great, but there's those people who are isolated and want someone to call, and knowing someone's job is dedicated to being there and knowing that someone with lived experience, it's transformative. I don't want to oversell it or get into hyperbole, but our warm line, that's what it is, right? It's, I got 3-4 employees out there sitting right now. So if someone's feeling like they need to talk to someone who gets it, they know there's someone whose life and their job is dedicated to that. And I think people living with communication disorders and people who stutter and anyone else deserves that. And going back to the healthcare system, right, centering that voice to lived experience would be about that. So that's my passion. That work is my passion, and that's the passion of everyone here at Channel. And Greg, I think it's obvious that it's your passion as well, is that you want people to know they're not alone, right? And that's where it starts, because that's where that hope comes from.
Well, Brad, thank you very much for your support and everything for for people who stutter, as well as for others with with the communication challenges. And Brad, I mean, some some sort of law, the NLSA, or more more than willing to to offer any supports and expertise to develop this partnership with Channel.
And as I was just saying, right, I echo that, right? Because everyone lives with different things. And it's those people who've been there, who get it, who create the transformation. So the work you folks do, and again, a lot of you doing it on your own time, or almost on your own time, it's really unbelievable, just your footprint, right? Your footprint on social media, your footprint with doing this, it's invaluable, and it makes a difference in people's lives. So for me, someone who's there, it's the thank you is to you, really, Greg, and your team, who do all the work that you do.
Well, Brad, thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate this. We really do.
Thanks for your time today, Greg and Katelyn. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat, and thanks for all the work you do. And Katelyn, best of luck as you move and get started up in Western.
Thank you.
All right, take care, folks.
Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering, has so much to talk about. Let's start listening.
This has been an episode of Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering. Some Stutter La is hosted and produced by Greg O'Grady, Katelyn Mayo, Emily Murphy, Dr. Paul DeDecker, and Melanie Crane. Some Stutter La is available on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. You can also check out the Some Stutter La channel on YouTube. To ask a question, send us a comment or suggestion, or just get in touch, find us online at Some Stutter Podcast on Instagram, or Some Stutter La Pod on Facebook. Thanks for listening.